Sometimes in life, it's not the wealth you have that brings peace. It's the faith you hold when everything else feels uncertain. In a quiet corner of rural America, far from the rush of cities and screens, lived a man whose story would teach an entire town, and maybe the world, what it really means to trust. The town of Brookhaven was small, a handful of houses scattered across fields of golden wheat and whispering corn. Life moved slow there. Mornings began with the sound of tractors and roosters, and evenings ended with sunsets so wide they made you forget the world had edges. Among the townsfolk was Eli Turner, a simple man in his early 40s. He worked on Mr. Granger's ranch, mending fences, feeding livestock, fixing whatever broke. He wasn't the kind of man who talked much, but everyone knew him for his calmness. He lived in a small wooden cabin at the edge of the fields, just big enough for one man and his faith. Eli didn't own much, a few shirts, an old truck that coughed more than it ran, and a Bible worn from years of reading. Yet somehow, he never complained. He lived each day with quiet gratitude, believing deeply that every sunrise carried his share of blessings, no more, no less. His employer, Thomas Granger, was a wealthy ranch owner, stern, practical, and proud of his hard work. Granger had built everything from the ground up, starting with a single horse stable inherited from his father. Over the years, he turned it into one of the biggest farms in the county. He wasn't a bad man, just one who believed that money and effort determined everything. To him, faith was fine for Sunday mornings, but useless on Monday. Granger fascinated Eli not because of his skill, but because of his peace. The man worked long hours, sometimes under a burning sun, but never complained. He didn't gossip, didn't chase bonuses, and didn't ask for more. He simply did his job, and smiled. One day, Granger found out Eli hadn't shown up for work. At first, he was irritated. But later that evening, something strange stirred inside him. What if Eli doesn't come back? He wondered. The man's quiet reliability had become the backbone of his ranch. So when Eli returned the next morning, walking up the dirt path with his hat in hand and a calm smile, Granger felt relief, though he'd never admit it aloud. That evening, Granger sat in his office, staring at the ledger. He thought about Eli, about how loyal and humble he'd been all these years. Maybe I should reward him, he thought. Give him something extra. Keep him motivated. The next day, when Eli came to collect his pay, Granger quietly added an extra $100 to the envelope. He didn't say anything, just handed it over with his usual nod. Eli accepted it silently, as always, tipped his hat, and walked away. No surprise. No thank you. No smile different from the one he gave every week. Granger watched him leave, feeling oddly disappointed. Weeks passed. Granger tried again, this time adding another $50. Still, Eli said nothing. Not a word. The rancher couldn't understand it. Most men would have been thrilled, even bragged about it to others. But Eli? He carried the same calm as before. That night, Granger sat on his porch, the stars spread thick across the black sky. His wife, Martha, poured him coffee. You look troubled, she said softly. It's Eli, he sighed. I've raised his pay twice, and he doesn't seem to care. No gratitude. No joy. Just nothing. Martha smiled knowingly. Maybe he's grateful in his own way. But Granger shook his head. No. When someone gives you something, you say thank you. That's basic decency. The next morning, unable to shake his curiosity, Granger called Eli into his office. Eli, he said, you've been working here a long time. I've been increasing your pay, you've noticed that, right? Yes, sir, Eli said calmly. Well, you've never said anything. Not even a thank you. Eli paused for a long moment, then looked up with the kind of gentleness that could silence a storm. Sir, he said quietly, I am thankful. But I don't see those extra dollars as something you're giving me. I see them as something God's giving through you. Granger frowned. What do you mean by that? Eli's voice stayed steady. When I was born, my Creator wrote down my share of blessings. Every grain, every breath, every dollar. If I receive more from one place, it's because maybe I'm receiving less from somewhere else. My portion is already set. You're just the means, not the source. The words hit Granger harder than he expected. He wasn't angry, just unsettled. Eli continued, "That's why I don't rejoice over more, or grieve over less. I just trust the one who provides." And with that, Eli tipped his hat again and left, walking out into the sunlight, back to his work. That night, Granger couldn't sleep. Those words, "You're just the means, not the source," echoed in his mind. He had always believed he was the maker of his own fortune. That everything he owned came from his grit and long hours. But what if there was more to it? Over the next few days, he began noticing things differently. The rain that came just when his crops needed it. The way his business somehow survived years when others failed. The random customers who showed up exactly when he needed cash flow. He realized he'd never really been in control. Something larger, unseen, had always been weaving things together. And Eli, that quiet man with calloused hands and a gentle heart, somehow knew it all along. One summer, a terrible storm swept through Brookhaven. Heavy winds tore down fences, lightning struck 2 barns, and a section of Granger's ranch flooded. Eli's cabin was destroyed completely. Granger drove through the night to check on him, heart pounding. When he found Eli sitting calmly on the remains of his porch, rain dripping off his hat, he couldn't believe it. "Eli. You've lost everything," he shouted over the thunder. Eli simply smiled. "Only what was never truly mine, sir." Granger stared at him, speechless. "I'll rebuild," Eli said softly. "And if not, maybe God has another plan for me." In that moment, Granger realized what faith really looked like. It wasn't in words or prayers alone, it was in peace. The kind of peace that doesn't shatter even when the world does. A few months later, Granger fell ill. The ranch began to struggle. Prices dropped. Debt piled up. For the first time in decades, he felt helpless. And just when everything seemed to be falling apart, Eli passed away. It happened quietly, a heart attack in his sleep. The whole town attended his funeral. Granger stood by his grave, hands trembling. "He had nothing," he whispered, "but he lived richer than most of us ever will." After the funeral, Granger decided to help Eli's family, his sister and 2 young nephews who lived in another town. He sent them money every month, in Eli's name. But strangely enough, even as his own finances suffered, he never ran out. Every time he gave, something unexpected came back, a business deal, a debt forgiven, a buyer offering more than expected. It was as if the balance Eli spoke of was now unfolding right before him. Years passed. The ranch recovered. Granger grew older, slower, softer. He often visited Eli's grave on quiet evenings, standing among the swaying grass. He'd whisper, "You were right, Eli. We're just the means, never the source." Sometimes, he'd catch himself smiling, remembering that simple man who taught him more about faith than any sermon ever could. So, if you've ever felt anxious about your future, if you've ever wondered why life feels unfair, take a lesson from that quiet man in Brookhaven. Work hard, yes. Dream big, yes. But trust the source more than the salary. Because when you stop depending on people for your blessings, and start trusting God as your provider, you'll find peace that no paycheck can buy.